Hello and welcome to the podcast. Every moment is sacred, where we interweave meditation and healing into everyday life. I am your host, Rain Elizabeth Stickney. Now, let us begin. Hey, welcome back. If you are here listening to this show for the first time, welcome. I am so happy to have you here. Before I announce today's guest, I am so pleased to share that I am hosting my very first in-person retreat since the beginning of the pandemic. Long ago now, I guess it was the late winter, it hadn't turned spring yet. I was planning one of my seasonal retreats where I used to hold half-day and day-long retreats throughout the year. And of course, the pandemic hit and changed the decision-making process for every business owner, I imagine. Definitely changed my decision-making process. And that retreat in the spring of 2020 did not happen. It was going to be called Bird Song, and it was going to be in my lovely Mill Valley, California office that I just adored, with a whole wall of windows looking out on trees. But alas, something else happened and years have passed, and now it is time for an in-person retreat, and I'm inviting you. I hope you come. It will be so much fun. This is a summer retreat, and it will happen July 9th through 13th. That's a Sunday through a Thursday. Now, if you have heard of this retreat, this particular summer retreat, I have changed the date. So please make note if you're interested. We're meeting from Sunday, July 9th to Thursday, July 13th. There's an option to extend your stay so you can be at the Trapp Family Lodge a little longer if you'd like to. This is a beautiful retreat center in Stowe, Vermont, and there are miles and miles of hiking. There's a wonderful cabin that we're going to hike out to together for lunch one day. There's an indoor pool, there's an outdoor pool, hot tub, all the amenities that you could ask for. And the important part about where this retreat is located is that it is situated in a beautiful part of the natural world. There are animals and flowers and trees and fields. And one of my favorite things in life is the beautiful connection between the human spirit and the spirit of nature. Perhaps they're even the same spirit. I wonder what you think. So this is a retreat that honors meditation and the natural world, and I am calling it the healing presence of nature. We have a lovely room to sit in for our practice. We'll do some movement and community exercises. We'll have an altar and we will meditate together. And I can't say enough good things about this opportunity. So reach out to me if you're interested. meditation@rainelizabeth.org. I'm enrolling now, taking deposits, early bird special until April 15th. So please come, let's connect. Today's episode on Every Moment is Sacred is with one of my favorite guests. And if you know me and if you have been listening to my show, I love all my guests. I really do. And there is not one favorite. It just wouldn't be fair because everybody is absolutely amazing. Cat Caldwell Myers is a wonderful woman who I met podcasting, and there was instant resonance and friendship. And we are soul sisters, and she is a soul sister to everyone. So that probably wasn't hard to accomplish, becoming her soul sister, but there really is a lovely connection between us, and we get to talk about all sorts of things in this episode including Gabrielle Roth's 4 questions of the shaman. And I just want to highlight these questions because even as Kat says in this episode, we really go through them all in our conversation, either symbolically or directly. And the 4 questions of the shaman are: when did you stop dancing? When did you stop singing? When did you stop being enchanted by stories? When did you stop being comforted by the sweet territory of silence? As I mentioned, Kat is a podcaster, and her show is called Horses, Mountains, Dogs. It's a wonderful show, and I recommend listening to it. She is also writing a book, and she has wonderful things going on this summer. She's touring across the country, offering retreats and workshops. She also has some current online offerings, and you can find out all about what she's up to by emailing her at caldwellmyers@gmail.com. Cat, like the animal, CAT, Caldwell, CALDWELL, Myers, MYERS. Cat Caldwell Myers at gmail.com. She's also on Instagram and Facebook. You can search for her name. I love Kat, and I love sharing this conversation with you. It is long and meandering, so I have broken it up into 2 parts. This is part 1. Kat is a lifelong horsewoman. She is a downhill skier. She is a spiritual seeker. She is very wise. She is a wife, mother of 2. She's a certified life coach, and she specializes in weight loss transformation and body positivity. She is magical, and I'm so excited to introduce you to her. Please enjoy the show.
Oh, I'm so happy to be here, Rain.
I love connecting with you, and I could just talk with you forever about anything.
So true. I mean, before you started recording just now, how many different things were we talking about and laughing about? And just to be in your energy is always a gift, Rain. Always.
Same.
Yeah.
I feel the same about you.
Aw.
So we get to have a healing conversation today. And I'm wondering if you have any inkling of a healing story you want to tell, or a healing topic that's present for you, or just what's up?
Oh my gosh. You know what's coming to mind for me right now, Rain, is moving, actually. And I know you just moved across the country a year ago, this year.
Yeah, almost 2.5 years.
Amazing. That just goes to show how time flies.
And
So,
it still feels fresh though. I have to say it still feels like, where am I and where is the Pacific Ocean?
right, right. Oh my gosh. Yeah, I grew up in the mountains and on the West Coast, and every time we would give directions, we would say, okay, you go north along the range. You know what I mean? And when I moved here to the Midwest to Chicago, for the first time, it was back in 2003. We didn't have GPS. Let me tell you, I got lost constantly because everything is flat, you know? So yeah, I hear you. Where am I? Thank goodness for GPS, which tells us like exactly where we are, but not on the soul level, right?
Oh, I have a story to tell you. It was shortly after I moved here to Vermont from California, and I was still getting my bearings. I'm still getting my bearings, and I was at the store and I needed to go home. This still brings tears to my eyes. I put in my GPS to go home, and I thought that I put in my Vermont home, but what came up was exactly how many miles I
Oh,
was away from my California home, which is like 300 and 50 whatever more than 3,000 miles with a
Totally.
lot of numbers in there and exactly how long it would take to drive straight. And I just started bawling because I
Oh,
was so far from home and my GPS was not helping. Was not helping me feel any better about that fact.
totally exacerbating the issue. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I feel that. I feel that story on so many levels. And I think that so many people do too. I had this conversation with someone earlier today. She was actually talking about taking a year abroad and then coming home, and how your home now, the home that you've identified as a home before, but you have this whole experience that has changed you forever, and you see things differently, and now that's gone. Portugal is no longer here. It's gone. And I think the experience when you move from one beloved place to another, and especially when you're settling in, but for me, that experience of where you come from and where you live and where your heart like really feels alive, that goes with you wherever you go. That's been my experience. And also, I always say there's that popular phrase, home is where the heart is. Yes. And for me, home is where the horses are.
Absolutely. I know you to be a horse person.
It's interesting though, because horses, for me, it's like they're part of the whole picture of what makes me feel at home. When you start thinking about what do horses need? What do they thrive on? Green grass, pasture, fresh air, silence. Like when quarantine started, we live about a mile and a half from I-94, a very busy freeway, and you can hear it,
Hmm.
kind of like the distant sound of the ocean. Even if you live a few miles from it, you can still kind of hear the shh, shh.
Yep.
When quarantine started, we heard silence for the first time here.
Wow.
And so many heard silence. I mean, the amount of noise pollution we have, right?
Mm-hmm.
Especially here we are as podcasters. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
every moment is sacred, right? But every silent moment is so sacred.
It really is. Yeah.
One thought that comes to me in silence is safety,
Mm.
right? And when I think about hanging out with the herd and those moments of silence, but then also when you hear a twig snap in the woods, something's there.
Yeah.
Is it a squirrel and everything's okay? Or is it a coyote? They're starting to come together, and we need to move
Mm-hmm.
around, right? So I
Mm-hmm.
think it's fascinating when we tune into nature. And I came across this quote recently. I believe it's by Gabrielle Roth, and she talks about the 4 questions of the shaman.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're probably familiar with these, but when diagnosing any sort of mental or soul sickness or illness, the shaman will ask, when did you last sing? When did you last dance? When were you last taken in by enchanting tales, like we're going to talk
Mm.
about today? And then the 4th question, and I love the way that she coined this, is something to the effect of, when did you last sit in the sweet territory of silence?
Beautiful.
Isn't it?
Yeah. I don't know that quote, but it really speaks to my heart. How lovely.
So I think, like, when I think about moving, everybody has a story of moving. And I've heard that moving, when it comes to stress, is akin to losing a loved one.
Mm.
That's a lot,
It's a
right?
big deal. It's a really big deal.
Yeah, I think when we moved here, oh my gosh, I had so much excitement and so many ideas. I was pregnant with them, and I was literally pregnant, Rain. And by the way, that had not been the plan. The plan was to move here first and then get pregnant. But you know what?
You got pregnant.
Sometimes that's how those things go, folks. So yeah, we were very pregnant, and I wasn't feeling so good and packing, and then driving across the country, hauling a horse trailer with our cat and our dog inside and two horses at the time. And it was April. It was the second week in April. And we started driving out of Idaho through Wyoming. Okay, here I'm telling you a story. I didn't know I was getting into it, but you must have called this one in.
I'm
And
here for it.
when you travel with horses, you have to think of places where you can stay overnight with them. So there's a beautiful website called horsemotel.com for anyone who's thinking about doing this. And you can find places to stay with your horses. So we found one called the Cowgirl Hotel, owned by a pair of lesbian professors. Great, looked great, had a beautiful suite with a really nice shower, which is something you're interested in when you're sitting in a car all day. And our pets were welcome and our horses were welcome. They'd have pasture to run around in and stretch their legs. And we started driving a little bit south and east, and a huge blizzard came in mid-April. Oh. One of these weird spring storms that just happened. And the road was literally closing down behind us. Like there was nothing we could do. I mean, it's not like you can pull over at a closer horse motel, right? There weren't options. We had another 5 hours to go, which turned into 8 hours, which turned into arriving in the middle of the night. And there was so much snow, you couldn't see the road, right? So we're on the phone saying, which chaparral do we turn into? We see one on the left. We can kind of see light straight ahead. No, that's the wrong one. Back up. You got to keep going down the road, which we can't see. So we're trying to back up and we're going back and forth. And a chaparral is, something that you drive under that would have the sign for the ranch on it or something like that, right? And this one didn't have anything written on it. Not that we would have been able to see it because it was a total whiteout. And so what happened as we went back and forth is that the back tire of the trailer dropped into a ditch next to the chaparral, which we also could not see. And it wasn't bad, but it was enough with all the snow that the trailer was stopped for the night. And we got to step outside and meet the neighbors of the Cowgirl Motel. Which was not where we thought we would be spending the night. And luckily, Grace, the way it was set up, had just enough space with the trailer at an angle for the door to be opened for our horses to safely get out.
Wow.
And we got to wait for this huge tow truck to show up that is designed for hauling 8,000-pound steel horse trailers out of ditches in the middle of a blizzard. I remember I was so tired and so pregnant and so over the whole drive. And what are we doing? And we've got a cat and a dog, and we're moving to the Midwest from the mountains that I love. And what's happening? I remember saying to my husband, honey, you get to hang out with the tow truck guy. Like, I'm just going to go rest in the nice warm bed inside and take a shower. And it turns out he had this long talk with this man and got to see all the fun machinery. Guys kind of geek out on all that stuff. It was pretty cool. He took some videos for me. I saw a little bit of it. And he had also had a home birth, and his wife was a doula. And we were in the process of starting to research, how our birth journey would go in the Midwest, and leaving behind the people we might have had babies with in the mountains, but taking their stories and their vision with us and so on. So you just never know when you literally start moving, right? What's going to happen? Who you're going to meet, when you're going to be not only asked to stop, but maybe forced to stop, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think it's fascinating. And I don't know if you have any experiences you'd share about how weather can come in and move our movement one way or the other. I remember recently you guys were having some really big blizzards, and I think maybe your Wi-Fi wasn't working and stuff like that, because I read your daily, gratitudes, right? But how sometimes what we think we're doing and what we think is important, and getting to a certain place by a certain time and all of that in a certain way, I refer to them as acts of God, because I didn't control that. I didn't know that was going to happen. Yes, it was operator error pulling in there and turn here, don't turn here, all of that humanness. But there's something else. I heard a horse trainer say this recently, a very famous horse trainer. His name's Ray Hunt. And he was talking about he's sort of the father or grandfather of natural horsemanship, which is really connecting with the natural nature of the horse, right? But he was being interviewed about all of his different techniques. And at the end, he said, and there is one more thing that makes it all come together. And I don't know what that is.
Right? Isn't that the point? And we don't know what that is. Yeah, the grand design.
Hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. We did have some big storms over the winter holidays, and we had a really severe cold snap all the way down to -38, which I hadn't been in temperature that cold before. So there's a lot of learning with weather, where in the San Francisco Bay Area of California, there is also weather, but it is not the same. Of course, there have been wildfires there in the past, and there has been flooding, and there's other kinds of weather. But there's something about the cold. There's something about the wind and the snow. And when the power goes out and it's very cold, and then there's only a fireplace to heat a home, how comfortable is that? There's a lot of learning curves and new decisions to be made for a California girl like me.
Were you born in California?
I was, yeah.
And most of your life until the last 2 years?
Yeah, yeah. I always tried to get out of California. I tried living in Belgium. I tried fantasizing about where else in the country or the world that I'd like to be, but I always would go back to California. And I finally just felt very settled there. And I knew that I'd never leave my home state because there was no reason to. And
Mm.
then in 2020, there were many reasons to for myself and my family. And I, in fact, told my partner, I'm taking our son and I'm leaving, and you can come with me if you want to. And he said, I'll come with you, which was a good choice.
I love it. What was when you made that choice, how did you choose Vermont? Did it call you? Did you like, I'm just curious.
Oh gosh, I forget if I've told you the story already, Kat. So it was the fourth year of really bad California wildfires that affected the Bay Area. And of course, there have been wildfires in California and other states always. It's natural, but there were just 4 years that were very severe, and the kind of smoke in the air that would keep us indoors, and the kinds of brush burns that would turn into wildfires overnight, and just a lot of uncertainty. And the first year of those sequential years of wildfires was the same year that my mom got very sick, and she passed away.
Oh,
And in one of those fires during that time, my youngest sister's house burned down, and she narrowly escaped with her life. I mean, literally narrowly escaped with her life, with
oh,
like her children and her husband, and one of their animals didn't make it, and
mm,
not remembering shoes because they had to leave in the middle of the night. It was just that bad
oh,
for their neighborhood. And so that was traumatic for the state. It was traumatic for the local area. It was traumatic for my family. And it was also traumatic for me. And that just set off the next 4 years. Of the fourth year, when the fires started, I have many sisters. I have four sisters. I was at another sister's house, and I was looking out towards Calistoga, which is a town in another county, but we're connected by sky, and we saw the smoke plumes. And it was August of 2020. And I thought to myself, I can't do this again. I
yeah.
just can't do this again. I had reached a threshold. And so the way we chose Vermont was, we thought maybe we would like to go to the Pacific Northwest. We have family up there. It's a beautiful part of the country and the world. And unfortunately, that year when we got up there, there was also a terrible wildfire that was very severe, and the air quality was so bad. It was even worse than California, and it was actually purple, toxic air that smelled like burning tires, that, like, as though you were, it was, there was nothing about it that was okay. It was happening, so it was okay because what happens is what happens, but it was not great to be in. And so I couldn't imagine moving from my home state that in the moment was in flames to another state that was in the moment in flames. And so Todd, my partner, and I, we both said, how about Vermont? And we found a
Had you
place.
been to Vermont before?
I had only been to Vermont once, but he had grown up in New Jersey, and Vermont, southern Vermont, was a place where his family had some land. And so he grew up as a child spending time in southern Vermont, and he had those those heartfelt memories of Vermont being a wonderful place for his soul.
Oh,
And we love it here.
oh, I love that. I was born in California as well, by the way.
Oh my gosh, I didn't know
I
that.
know. I know. I'm like a closet California girl. I was born in Torrance, Los Angeles, and I actually went back to California for high school. And I have a lot of family out there, mostly in the Bay Area now, come to think of it, and some still in LA, but mostly my formative years were in New Mexico. And I always joke, I told a friend this story this morning. I don't really think of myself as a New Mexican until we start talking about green chili or water conservation. And then I find I have a lot of really strong opinions. They come from growing up in New Mexico. But yeah, I just echo the fires of the West. And I think that, gosh, I remember one season in Teton Valley, Idaho, where we had ash on it was like Pompeii, right? We had ash all over all of the windshields, all over our decks. You couldn't be outside. So here you move to a place to be outside and you have these seasons. And I know we talked about before we started, I'm working on this book right now. And the book, a big part of it is this journey of 6,000 miles that we took in 2018 with our horses and our infant and our toddler and a dog and a friend and my husband some of the time when he wasn't working in India, and the fires that summer in Colorado were horrible. And
Yeah.
I remember, I was rereading these chapters in the manuscript where we were making the decision to leave Teton Valley and literally drive into the fire zone. And we were talking to the barn every day where we were going to be boarding our horses about the evacuation plan. It was the first time that we wouldn't be camping out with our horses. We'd be 8 miles away from them, staying in a family home. And the fear, I had a good friend in college who lost everything to a house fire. And I remember his perception of things, of stuff, and that it could all just go away, right? But also he wasn't as attached, but he had also lost everything. No photos, no memories, no clean slate, right?
Yeah.
But also horrifying. I mean, it's kind of like the moving thing. What do you take with you? What don't you? And then actually I had this interesting conversation with Linda Koenoff, who will probably talk about my podcast, Horses, Mountains, and Dogs, but her interview is dropping March 10th and 11th, and she's amazing. She's written 16 books. She's sort of the grandmother of equine assisted coaching and this work of human development with the horse. Anyways, yeah, I was talking to her. I lost track of my story because I just got so excited about Linda Koenoff. Where was I?
It was the summer of 2018, and you were traveling 6,000 miles with your horses and sometimes your husband when he wasn't working in India and everybody else.
That was an epic time, Rain.
I can hardly imagine that is, and then choosing to go, you said choosing to go towards the fires
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
Colorado.
I remember now. So she has these really amazing, they're called the Way of the Horse cards. I actually have them here. So I'll just show you this. They're republishing this, but it looks like this. And then on one side, you have a book, and on the other side, you have these spirit cards. Here's an example of one, beautiful images of horses. And then she has an essay about each one. But we were talking about grief and sadness. And she made this really important point in her essay and in the spirit card. I think it's called Master of Sadness, where she talked about there's a really big difference when you're choosing something Like you choose to break up with someone, for example, or you
Mhm.
choose to move versus your house burned down or someone died unexpectedly, right?
Mhm.
Very different. So that was for me an interesting, and even going back to it right now, that's so true. And I wonder why that is. And on some levels, it's not that it makes it any easier, but there's sort of a different energetic quality
Mhm.
to the sorrow, perhaps, and perhaps also to the healing available or not accessible in some
Mhm.
spaces, right?
It's reminding me of ambiguous loss. Have you heard
Mm,
of this term? It
no.
it's juicy. There's been a lot of research done about it, and it's exactly what you're talking about. It's when there is loss, significant loss, but there's either an unknown quality about the loss, like somebody goes missing, and
Mm,
you actually don't know if you're going to see them again or if they're living. And so it's ambiguous because it's a loss and we don't know.
mm,
Or like you were saying with a breakup or a move where that person or that place still exists and
mm,
you're choosing not to be there, or maybe the breakup happened the other way and the person chose not to be with you, or it was mutual. But when there's a separation and a loss with something that still remains, that still
mm,
exists, and it is different, you're right, it's a different kind of loss, and it's very important to consider, because if we don't grieve those losses, they continue to affect us.
mm. Yeah.
I mean, grief is always affecting whether we deal with it or not. But I think that, especially for a healing conversation and for you and I who are so interested in healing, it can be much better to address any kind of grief or loss with compassion and
Mm.
consciousness and directly.
Absolutely. Yeah. I've used this term a lot since the pandemic, but the idea of a collective grief, because all of us, whatever our experience, wherever we were, went through a lot of change plans, right?
Mm-hmm.
A lot of changes, just collectively, the wave of decisions. And actually, this is a big theme in the book,
Mm-hmm.
decision fatigue.
Oh, I hear that one.
Most moms do.
Right? I mean, every parent, right?
Pretty much. Yep. Motherhood is a big theme, and also the priorities, when you're parenting both your two-legged babies and your four-legged babies, right? And
Mhm.
you're in a changed space, it's been a fascinating journey for me because I had horses and dogs first, and then I had babies. And so they joined the family second, right? And my
Mhm.
animals, it was really still is very interesting to watch them day by day in their own ways parent my children.
Oh, I'm so
Yeah.
glad they do that.
Yeah, lovingly and gently, like, "Oh, you don't even know what you're saying. You're okay." It's really cute, especially my big ex racehorse Jet. I mean, I have these videos of Gracie, probably 18 or 20 months old, toddling down the driveway, pulling him, come on, come on, Jet. And he's like, I'll follow you anywhere because you came out of my mommy. And now Grace is 7 and she can get on him by herself, ride him on the trail, and he takes such good care of her. He's come a long way because, horses, especially racehorses, come out of a very severe collective trauma coming off the track. I mean, that's a whole thing. It's a little bit like soldiers coming back from war. Some see different things, but all of them went through really rigorous boot camp. And yeah, racehorses are no exception. So I just find that connection between animals and humans so fascinating, and so many opportunities for healing. I got to connect with a group. I'm not exactly sure when I'll air these interviews, but 3 people from an organization called Horses for Mental Health. And they have a documentary and do all of these retreats and workshops and amazing things. And yeah, it's fascinating to me. I feel like dogs too, emotional support animals. I want to hear about your
Mhm.
bunny, by the way. I want to hear how we're doing. But I feel like no matter the size, the connection, the spirit, the heart is there. There's something very special that happens for the human in caring for the animal soul. And so much of it is connected, speaking of the silence, to nonverbal communication.
Yes. Oh, 100%. Yes. And then learning to speak the language of the animal, which I'm intuiting you know what I mean. But just to illustrate, my son is beginning to speak the language of our bunny, Ash. And so he'll say, "Oh, I heard Ash, and he da 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 da. He likes this or he doesn't want that, but he's hearing the bunny's voice in that intuitive telepathic realm. I completely trust it. I also hear our bunny Ash's voice, and I am just that way, anyways. And trees as well. My son also talks with the trees, which I'm so proud of and thrilled about. So, yes, the presence of animals is so healing and magical and takes us to a different realm.
Yeah. The healing realm, perhaps,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Where healing is possible for all of us.
Yeah. Sometimes I think it's like we can get, oh, wow, it's totally snowing outside, by the way.
Ooh,
Actually,
it
really
started.
big flakes. Yeah. These windows are closed. I'm like, what is all of that? Is someone over there? Nope. Something is over there. Speaking of nature and intuiting, right? Big, chunky spring flakes are coming down over here in Chicagoland. Yeah, I was just thinking about like the nonverbal communication, but also when we let go of our thinking mind, how it should go, what's happening, all of that, and we just tap into that intuition and that feeling sense, which I believe animals are in that state all the time, right? And they do have memories and they do have thoughts. And also, those are all processed. There's a fascinating book. I don't know if you've read this one. They're all processed through the body. Peter Levine, Waking the Tiger. Have you read that
Oh,
book?
yes. One of my favorite books, Kat.
Me too. But like processing, shaking it out,
Yeah.
And I think so many of us we're stuck in a state of mind. Tony Robbins talks about change your state, right? You did. California to Vermont. So did I. Idaho to Illinois. It's like, and it's interesting because one of my meditations recently has been, we love our home here. We're very invested in our home, right? But also to love the one you're with and be present to it. And if there's something that you're, say, missing or wish was closer, and you might go there. So for us, we go to the mountains and we're working on designing a lifestyle and business that makes it possible to live part-time here, part-time there, right? And it's a vision and a journey that's all connected to the book and the book tour this summer, by the way. But I feel like when we can just really stop with all the thinking and just be present and ground into the feeling sensation and what we're supposed to do where we are, bloom where we're planted in that moment. And for me, that was a big part of quarantine because for the first time, right before quarantine, I should add, I gave up all thoughts of moving out west for Lent. I'm not really Catholic, but speaking of the 40-day thing, by the way, every now and then when Lent comes around, if I've paid attention and I see the Ash Wednesday thing going on, I'll be like, oh yeah, I should think about something to give up for 40 days. What should it be? What's like a bad habit or obsession? And I had been online looking at different properties and fantasizing about a life and what would it be like if we lived there and so on and so forth, right? And so I said, okay, for 40 days, I'm just going to stop that. And then we went into quarantine. And it was such a moment of love the one you're with, be grateful you have a home. You feel home is where the horses are. Your horses are here with you. People who had horses at boarding facilities weren't allowed to see them, right? Just like caretaking facilities, all of that, right? And it was like I was finally able to catch up and arrive to this incredible place that we have. And then people started calling, can we please come and meet your horses and ride them and do something outside? And we started leading these retreats and doing these pony camps and having all of these people, this like little horse community just blossomed out of nowhere, right? but it was totally out of the pandemic. I mean, that's what it was. It was, I
Mm-hmm.
think it was out of this deep need to be close to animals and in nature at a time when so many people were struggling and needing to return to some of these basics, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's how I see that, was like no accidents in the universe, but also these things are always good for you. They always have been, they always will be. And we can get really wrapped up in things that aren't really that important, or thinking it's about, oh, coming and riding the horse. That's not all that it's about. It's about
Mm-hmm.
meeting the horse where they are, where you are, tapping in and being present to how you're feeling,
Yeah.
what you're
Yeah.
thinking, like really tuning in. And I especially love teaching and also witnessing people starting to hear the animals speak to them, because I almost feel like it is a witnessing of the language as much as some people do hear, right? But a lot of people feel, it's like,
Mm-hmm.
feel that they might be doing this, and then that exchange of energy when you start to work together with the animal, especially if you have a common purpose you're working towards, like in the case of horses, leading them somewhere, or
Mm-hmm.
giving them water, or grooming them. There are like so many ways to connect to the animal kingdom. I don't know, I just love it.
Yeah. I mean, it's what you're made up of, this connection with the animals and life everywhere. I believe that part of the healing people in general were experiencing in the connection with animals was that there was a time where people were not hugging people. Like
Hmm.
people, we all made our different choices, so I can't say everyone, but there are enough people on this earth who were isolating in the way that there wasn't a lot of human touch or contact. And thank goodness you had animals that people could come visit, and this beautiful community blossomed right at the moment that it was most needed, and you were open to it and embraced it and witnessed it and facilitated.
The other thing that was interesting about it, like all businesses in the pandemic, we had to manage and make so many decisions, talk about decision fatigue, about wear masks, don't wear masks, how do you control people in an outdoor environment, let them come in my house to use the bathroom, which bathroom, provide hand sanitizer, ask them to bring their own, like, what do you do,
Yes, yes.
and so many little decisions. And there were also these little unexpected gifts and opportunities. So, for example, horses, by their very nature, on some level, require, as Linda Kohanov was saying the other day, a certain level of awareness. And I would add, in many states, especially with the smaller children, and every state, we have so many liability waiver issues and so on and so forth for horse people doing any sort of horse thing, especially on their own property. But it's social distancing. It's like the classic when you're teaching people. So we would always joke, all right, let's keep a horse's length apart from each family, So you're in your pod, you can be in your pod, and we would like set up the groupings of the chairs, and outdoor spaces so that people could work, a pitchfork length apart, a horse's length apart. There were just all these interesting little measuring opportunities, for seeing ourselves,
Mhm,
and this
mhm.
language that suddenly was becoming a part of us, that our children were, making sense of, alongside us making sense of it. It was really fascinating. And then early on, before the mask thing like really took off, I got everyone bandanas. Like,
Mhm.
you have to be a cowboy. If you're within a horse's length of somebody, just put it up over your nose.
Yep. I
But
used
we
bandanas too in the beginning.
totally, we got to have some humor about it. And then, more than anything, just an experience for people to be present with each other, right?
Mhm,
And with the animals.
mhm. Did they get to touch the animals?
Oh, yeah. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, we did a lot of horse hugging,
Uh-huh.
to your point. A lot
Yeah.
of horse hugging and connecting with the horse's energy. They're magnetic field. We've talked a little about horses because you told me a
Mm-hmm.
fun horse story when I interviewed you. But their magnetic field of their heart is, I think, 40 times greater than a human's. So, okay, well, what does that really mean? It means if we're in a dark room and we don't know that they're here, energetically, you could feel them 40 feet away.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas, you know, how far away would you be able to energetically feel another human?
Mm-hmm.
Depends on your spidey sense,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But like, yeah, I think horses are so amazing. And I always say that they are bigger than our problems. Of all domesticated animals, I'm just not very familiar with camels or elephants, for example, or cows. I have friends who ride cows and bison, but I just don't really energetically know them, or they're not really part of my
Okay,
blueprint.
wait. Do you have friends who ride cows and bison? Like they get on top of them?
Yeah, it's a thing. You can Google it. They're all over TikTok
I
because
love it.
it is fascinating, right? It is fascinating. And you have different problems. I actually met a guy last month who his dad was a bullfighter and he always wanted to be a bullfighter, but then he realized that he wasn't really cut out of it and didn't really want that 8 second, the whole thing. So instead he became, I don't remember exactly what he calls himself, but he's basically like the clown who
Mm-hmm.
helps save people's lives once the 8 seconds is over, right? And works with, as he was saying, the energy of the bull to guide the bull also to safety, because otherwise they want to hurt themselves. Like it's an interesting situation because there's a part of me that's like, I'm not even sure that I'm down with that whole thing to begin with, but I also, especially from the space of one adrenaline junkie to another, right, which I identify as someone who really loves adrenaline and is in recovery from that, by the way. But recognizing, like, what is it, as Brene Brown says, to put yourself in that arena? Like, what would that really be like? And instead of judging that person, just recognizing, wow, like you put your life at stake every single day and are also there to protect other people's lives.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, what's that really like? Right?
Mm-hmm.
The credit
Yeah.
goes to the one in the arena, right?
I immediately think of the intensity, and speaking of energy, just the combined energy of the animal, the person who is, your friend who is directing the safety for all, and the person who is just bullfighting, and the energy of that moment to stay conscious and present in it. Wow. Wow, that person is
Yeah.
in the moment.
And direct it. And I think the other piece is so is the entire audience,
Yes. And there's the
right?
witness, the huge witness of many, many, many people, all eyes on what's happening.
Well, and what's so fascinating, something I've been thinking about recently is we have this moment where you and I are having a real live conversation. And then we have the moment when you're going to air this interview and people are going to listen to it. And they're present to that real live conversation in whatever day and time and week and home move situation that they're in. And then again, and then again and again, you have this ripple effect, right? So something I've been thinking about recently is like, when you watch a TikTok video or Instagram or whatever, a photograph, it continues to ripple, like that image of the video I have of Gracie leading Jet when she was a toddler. She's not a toddler anymore, but like that video is timeless. It
Mhm.
bounced around and people kept resharing it and so on because people could relate to just what a beautiful moment that was in time, right?
Mhm.
So that's been something I've been thinking about recently because we have, and it's sort of flat. I mean, social media is in a way, it's a flat universe, right? It's a screen with an image, but our hearts were so taken in by the stories and by the sound. This is part of why I love podcasting so much because I'm so auditory,
Mm.
right? I hear you, I hear it, I want to hear from you, I hear your soul when you speak. I feel it. And so do the animals, by the way.
Mhm.
And I
Mhm.
think they also return us to that silence, which is something, especially visually, it can be very noisy scrolling social media, for example, right? But when we walk away and we share a story or repeat something that we saw or felt, that oral tradition goes on, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
So,
Yeah, it ripples and it echoes and it continues.
yeah, Yeah.
Yeah. The story and also the feeling and any lessons within the story, like any meaning that's conveyed, it gets transmitted.
And that's a gift. The other thing I've been thinking about recently, so I was telling you a little bit about this horse road trip book that I'm working on. It's also
Mhm.
like a 40-page daily reader, is also what it is, by the way. So, what's been interesting going back through that is so many of the stories are in some ways repetitive and they have this very high level of intensity. So, for example, let's just take the bullfighter thing for a minute. Okay, you go to the rodeo, it's a 2 hour event, right? And you've got all kinds of things. You've got people galloping with flags, you've got barrel racing, you have the bullfighting, you have some different things. But 2 hours of bullfighting might be a little much. You know what I mean?
Yes.
It might be the right thing for some people, but might be a little much. So it's been interesting to reread many of the chapters where that is actually what happened. I mean, it's totally what happened, and that's the order in which it happened. And my husband is a chemical engineer, also in recovery from that job of 30 years. But he's so detail oriented. So he's so funny as he's reading through the chapters. He's like, "Babe, we weren't in North Dakota when this happened. No, no, no. We were you're missing the point. The point was we were driving up the mountain." Right? But it's like, it's amazing to go back through your writing and back through the history, a chapter of your life with the perspective you have from
Mhm.
everything you've gone through and everything that you are now to
Mhm.
decide how many bullfighting scenes are we going to put in, for example,
Mhm.
regardless of the fact that there might have been 20 of them that took place. That would be half the story. So maybe we'll edit some of these out in place of some of these stronger solutions for healing, like the healing stories, the amazing miracles that took place in the desert. This
Mhm.
one of the strongest themes is this idea of, have you ever been in that place where you had no idea how you were going to continue? You really
Mhm.
just didn't know how you were going to make it work. There was nothing that made sense. And then, like a mirage, an angel or some sort of human being or some sort of situation appeared before you.
Have you ever had one of those moments in your life where you had no idea what to do or how the situation would resolve, and then a miracle happened? This is where we're leaving off with part one. And part two will air next week, next Friday, and you'll get to hear the whole story of what angelic miracle appeared before Cat's eyes when she needed that kind of divine assistance. You'll also hear Kat and I continue our lovely, friendly, meandering conversation. And we include, she actually brings up the wonderful poem by Oriah Mountain Dreamer, The Invitation. If you know this poem, you might even know some of it by heart. But let me begin it for you so you can remember. The invitation. It doesn't interest me what you do for a living. I want to know what you ache for. And if you dare to dream of meeting your heart's longing. And the poem goes on and on. And another stanza that Kat and I both like and even discuss is the part that says, "It doesn't interest me to know where you live or how much money you have. I want to know if you can get up after the night of grief and despair, weary and bruised to the bone, and do what needs to be done to feed the children." Pat and I are both moms, and so we can relate to this, the trials and tribulations of being a whole person and also mothering after long nights of who knows what, getting up the next day and doing what needs to be done. We do this for our children, for our animals. I'm sure you do this in your life for your loved ones or for yourself, whatever the case is. So tune in again next week for the second part of this fun and magical and insightful conversation with Cat Caldwell Myers. And in the meantime, Notice how in your world, every moment is truly sacred. Thank you so much for listening. It has been a great joy to have your presence here in this podcast. I welcome you to celebrate the joy and wisdom in your life exactly as it is. And I welcome you to feel loved, fully loved, exactly as you are. www.rainelizabeth.com